everyone, and welcome back to Cyrus Webb Presents here on Amazon Live. I'm your host, Cyrus Webb. Glad you all could join us once again. Also, want to welcome those tuning in on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn. We'll welcome you guys too to our broadcast, as well as those who are joining us on YouTube. Glad you all could be with us as well. Excited to welcome Dr. Judith Reifsteck to our broadcast today. She's celebrating a great book today. We're going to be having a conversation about. I want to also say to those who are joining us on the Amazon Live side, welcome you guys. Mary Wheeler, hello to you. Glad you could be able to join us over there. And we're excited too about all of the great things that are happening in my home state of Mississippi right now, which is where Dr. Reifsteck is joining us from. I'm in Mississippi right now too, but we're not in the same location. We've been having some crazy weather. Parts of my city are actually still getting roads cleared and lights on. But we're glad to be able to talk to her about her great new book. You guys see it here. It is called Memoried and Storied. We're going to talk to her not only about the writing of the book, but also the great research she's been able to do on it and what she hopes you're able to take away from it. For those joining us on the Amazon Live platform, you guys will see the book either here in this corner or down below. So make sure you guys do grab your copy of it. If you have any questions for Dr. Reifsteck, make sure you guys do put those into the comments section as well. Felicia Brookins, hello to you on the Facebook side. Welcome to you. And Dr. Reifsteck, thank you so much for the time.
Thank you so much, Cyrus. It's wonderful to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, the pleasure is definitely all mine. I want to thank our mutual friend, Don Hardy, for setting up this chat with us for today. I want to begin where we are now, though, because this book, the subtitle of the book, Dr. Reifsteck, is Healing Our Shared History of Racial Violence. I want to talk about that because what has it been like for you to share with people how this is a history that we all do share?
Great question. What it's been like, it's been quite a journey. However, I'm, grateful for the experience I've had. It's been about a year and a half now, 2 years since the book began for me. I took a trip to Montgomery, Alabama, where the National Monument for Peace and Justice is located. And before I went to Montgomery, I made a list of, most of you know, probably the audience is already aware that the museum is frequently called the Lynching Museum.
Mhm.
It's where over 4,000 souls are memorialized. Those would be the victims of racial violence, 1877 to 1955. And before going to the museum, I was interested in learning the names and locations and details of any individuals who had been lynched in the regions right around where I live. I live in the Shenandoah Valley on the western side of the state of Virginia near Charlottesville.
Mhm.
And so I was able to find 9 people who had in fact been lynched in the neighboring counties. And there was one woman, Charlotte Harris, who had been lynched 13 miles from my home. And off I went to Montgomery. And those of you that have been there know how moving it is. There are 800 cylinders that hang from the ceiling, and each cylinder represents a county in the United States where known and documented lynchings had occurred. And when I got home, I wanted to learn more. There's an excellent resource in my own state at James Madison University in Harrisonburg, where I used to teach. It's a database of the 100 known and documented lynchings in the state of Virginia. So I was able, I didn't do 9, but I did 4. I did 3 stories in Virginia, 1 in South Carolina. And through the process of learning more about the actual story of each lynching, but more importantly, of each community remembrance project that memorializes the victims who were lynched, I also learned about racial terror and the violence that occurred during those years at a time when I had already been somewhat involved as an activist in local social justice organizations to move towards racial reconciliation. So that's kind of a thumbnail of how the book started.
Yeah. And with your research, what you've been able to do is pair it with these very powerful photos. And the ones that really struck me, I'd never seen anything like this that I can recall, Dr. Reifsteck, and that is individuals taking some of the soul from the properties of where some of their loved ones may have been murdered. Talk to us about that. What was that like for you to witness, but also to experience that with them, being able to have that piece of their loved ones in such a, I think, a poignant time for them as they're doing this remembrance, but also in remembering what happened to them.
Absolutely. I like to keep the jar that is symbolic of the jars that are used in the community remembrance projects with me, because I have found, as you did in looking at the photo, that the temperature changes in the room and the emotional tone of the conversation changes somewhat when you're holding the jar. What happens in a community remembrance project, the first part, which can take months or years, involves what I've already mentioned, the research to learn about who the lynching victim was, where it occurred, what happened before, during, and after. But the committee that forms, which is just interested citizens, to find out those answers, then takes it a step further and holds a commemoration ceremony. And all of this is done in partnership with the Equal Justice Initiative, which is located in Montgomery, Alabama, is the sponsor of that museum I mentioned. So these jars, there's a display in the museum of over 400 of them, which came from the local ceremonies. And there are people who, were involved in holding the jar, transporting the jar. Sometimes I know in Charlottesville, a community near me, Mr. John Henry James was the lynching victim in that occurrence. And there was actually a kind of a civil rights pilgrimage that took the jar to Montgomery. And that happens for a lot of local projects.
It's interesting that you mentioned John Henry, because I thought about when I was reading the book. It goes to another point that I picked up on in this book that I think is interesting for our audience to be able to take in, Dr. Reifsteck, whether they're joining us here in Mississippi or anywhere in the world. And that is that the way that hatred shows itself has definitely changed. But, there was a time when it was all hidden behind sheets and the cloak of darkness. Now it's in broad daylight. And one of the things you mentioned, I think, about John, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that, there was not even any type of will to even hide who was involved. And I think I thought about, too, another instance that we've seen in the news recently, you talk about in the book about, of course, the shooting at the church, where, parishioners invite someone in, and then, of course, the horrific things happen. What has that been like for you to see the evolution of the way that hate shows up and the way it's treated?
Absolutely. Yesterday was actually the anniversary of the Mother Emanuel shooting in Charleston, South Carolina, 8 years. Dylan Roof, of course, the white supremacist who committed that horrendous tragedy, picked June 19th on purpose. And I think it's that particular episode, as any episode of racial violence, is a window into the very things you're talking about, Cyrus. Today, the point is to further the cause and resurrect the principles of white supremacists. Whereas the violence, the hatred, the fear of white supremacists who were losing power after the Civil War is the same today, but the techniques are different. The purpose, as Jim Crow came on the horizon and as Reconstruction sunsetted, the purpose of that racial terror violence was to send a message to all Black people in the South that nothing will change, that you will remain subservient and discriminated against and second-class citizens. And it did that. It was designed to do that. So there were never any consequences or legal or judicial proceedings against the lynchers, although most people in the communities knew exactly who they were.
Right.
Today, we have cell phones, we have the civil rights legislation that passed in the 60s. There's a different ethos about us as a community, as a country, as a nation, and isn't that something to celebrate? But the impulse to remain the way we were, for certain frightened white people who are prone towards sociopathic violence, that impulse is the same as you observed, for sure.
Felicia says on Facebook, "The subject touches my soul. It is a hard truth, but much appreciated in memory of the victims of such horrific acts." And Dr. Reifsteck, something you just said reminded me of something you actually wrote in the book. And I want to actually read this because I think it goes to the other thing that is so important. And that is, even though we may see the prevalence of darkness, there are always individuals of light who find a way to be able to keep moving forward and to try to change things. You say this on page 15 of the book, into the acknowledgement. For more than 50 years, racial justice advocates have been incorporating this idea into their mission. Members of prayer circles and other groups dedicated to justice have been using radical love and acceptance to drown hatred and violence in the waters of shared humanity. Thought that was powerful because we are living in a shared humanity, but some are using love where others are using hate. What was your hope for this book? When at the end, I thought to myself, it was great history for me to be able to read and reflect on and to think about what has happened, and also, of course, those who are evoking change. But what is your hope that people will read this book and then want to do or know?
Mm. The main purpose, can I be selfish for a minute, is to help me never forget what you just wrote.
Mm,
Because it can be easy, it's very real, actually, to forget that
mm,
in today's world. However, it's not my reality. And the study of racial violence and the action towards making it illegal and punishing those who commit it is winning. It is winning. It doesn't seem like it's winning, but it's winning. It's why I come to Mississippi, because Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina are where much of this started, what I read about. It's also where the solution started and is still happening in earnest. The civil rights movement started here, as we all know, as well as many other places. But I think the other thing I really want to say, what I hoped would happen, is that instead of getting caught up in the noise and the aggression and the political differences, readers as well as myself would see the issue of racial violence as an interpersonal experience. You know, I'm not a historian. I never taught Black history. I
mm,
did teach emotional communication, psychotherapy, human relations. And in the end, the goal is to come to care about the same things and for white people to become co-owners and of the trauma and really practice joined empathy with their Black friends and neighbors who carry this pain in a different way. We can all have that pain and resonate with it, but that would be a secondary purpose.
love that. I want to go back to that because it's something you and I talked about earlier. Dr. Reifsteck, I wanted to make sure we talk about, and that is the psychological effects of this. I want to say for those who are just tuning in, welcome to Cyrus Webb Presents here on Amazon Live. If you guys have not gotten the new book by Dr. Judith Reifsteck, now is your opportunity. It's called Memoried and Storied. I got mine here on Amazon. It's a beautiful hardcover book. You guys can get it today for $28. We have it highlighted in the carousel on the Amazon Live side. For you guys who are tuning in on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and Twitter, you all will see the link. You guys can go over to be able to get it for yourself. Dr. Velma Bagby is joining us on the West Coast. Hello to you, Dr. Bagby. Glad you could be able to join us. And Don, we were talking about you earlier. Don Hardy is in the chat as well. She said the museums here in Jackson do an excellent job of capturing Black history, including the horror of lynching. So true. And it's so interesting, too, that I'm having you on today, Dr. Reifsteck, because I just interviewed the executive director of the Nissan Foundation on the radio side here in Mississippi today. And the museums actually just got a grant from them because of the work they're doing in being able to spread this history. So it's a great time. I want to talk about the psychological impact of this because I have to say, I remember when the lynching photography exhibit came to Mississippi years ago. I just started on radio. Dr. Reifsteck, I think I'd been on a couple of years. I told the station I did not want to go. I was on a local station here, 90.1. I did not want to go and see it. But I wanted to interview the director of the photography. They said I couldn't interview them unless I went to see the exhibit. And I remember going to see it, and it was just, I've never seen anything like that before in my life. But the thing that got me, they had a board where you could write your thoughts.
Yes,
And a girl wrote on there, I hate white people. And I
yes,
saw that on the paper, and I thought to myself, this is exactly why I didn't
yes,
want to see it,
yes.
because I knew the emotion, for one thing, that so many people would have. You do address in the book the psychological impact of this violence as well. What was that like for you to not only to absorb as you were doing the research, but then to pull away from after you finished?
Yeah. It is horrible to re-experience these occurrences. The only thing worse than revisiting them is not revisiting them, not knowing about it, not talking about it, not addressing it. That's worse
Mm,
because we repeat what we don't repair.
mm,
And I agree with Dawn. Jackson is one of the most amazing places to come to immerse yourself in what really did happen. And if anybody's free tonight at 6 o'clock, they can come to one of those great museums, the Smith Robertson Museum and Cultural Center, where I'll be talking about the book. However, the psychological impact is different for every single person who encounters the subject of lynching. Every single person, every single Black person, every single biracial, multiracial, or white person, because we all have different lived experiences.
Right.
And the most important thing is to find a way to talk about race and talk about racism and always connect it to what's happening in the present, because it's very connected to what's happening in the present.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I think of, you might notice there's absolutely no pictures like that in my book on purpose. The cover of my book is done by an artist, Ment Nelson, who you can find on the internet, a talented South Carolina artist, a beautiful photo. All his photos are amazing. And it's an ordinary, everyday celebration of a family attending a baptism of one of their family members at the creek in South Carolina. During these same years, I write about the violence happening. Because if you look at those photos, here's the deal. The people in those photos are someone's husband, son, brother, father, mother. And through feeling that and our feelings, for me, it's never a problem or a question of how I feel about it. It's a question of what I'm doing about it. We can do it, revisit the horror, for the specific purpose of learning more and moving towards racial reconciliation. I would have a similar thing to write on a reaction board in the Civil Rights Museum in Jackson. I hate white people. I am a white person who hates the white people who did that. So we all have our journey. And the important part is to connect to each other as we move towards solutions and peace.
Right. Such a great point. Dr. Velma just wrote something I didn't know. She says, I plan to purchase. It sounds compelling. My great-grandfather was lynched in Mississippi. Dr. Velma, I did not realize that. I'm so sorry to hear about that. And let's see, I have several comments coming in. Dr. Reifsteck, bear with me for a second. Felicia says, heartbreaking to know that many of our families have this tragic event in their family. Terry McGee is joining us from Texas. Hello to you, Terry. This is a very good subject to talk about. Felicia says that this makes me emotional. Thank you for remembering these souls. It is an important conversation. It has not always been easy for me, Dr. Reifsteck, to have conversations like this on the platform, on the radio, or even now for Amazon, because I know people do bring, you and I were talking about this earlier, bring their own experiences and their thoughts about it. But it is something that is important. You say something in the book in talking about the psychological effect in the chapter memory. I want to actually read this as well. Then talk to you about a point you made about what photos are not in the book. Because when I got to Mamie Teal, I thought about that when I was getting to the end of the book. But I'll talk to you about that in a second. But you say this on page 48 of the book. Psychologically, in these horrific situations, we often underestimate three salient features of human behavior. I want to talk about the third one. Humans who cannot feel or admit their own suffering and vulnerability can be dangerous, especially when they hold a role as a family, community, or government leader. So I want to ask you, talk to us about the danger, Dr. Reifsteck, of not having this conversation, of not talking about what has happened and what is still happening.
Absolutely. Well, if you are pushed into not talking about racial violence, there's some oppression, some censorship involved, and it takes an aggressive effort to do that. So not in every situation, but in most situations, the person that I was just referring to is probably in some leadership position, enforcing and insisting that we don't talk about the violence. And again, I bring it back to the individual level because it's where my training is, that if you're healing from trauma, you need to talk about that trauma. And anyone who's been through it has learned the hard way that you can't get out of it without talking about it, sharing it, gaining the trust and safety you need to do that, but doing that nonetheless. And so this violence at the group level is the same. And not everyone wants to do that. And that's all right. I don't always want to do that. So we can listen to that. But the pushback can be addressed through the truth of what happened. And, there's a lot of people who know more than I do about achieving racial reconciliation and being true, but connected with other people when you're dealing with putting it to rest, commemorating, and doing the work.
So I want to ask you, you just brought up another question for me, but I want to ask you, though, about what you said earlier about the decision about the photographs. How did you make that decision, especially when it came to something like Emmett Till's murder, and you have the photo, of course, of Mamie Till in the book? How did you make the decision of what you wanted to share and what you did not want to share?
It's hard because it cuts both ways, you know. Mamie Till courageously decided the other thing, that America needed to see it. And is it Daniela Fraser who took the photos of George Floyd as he lay dying on the sidewalk? I think that was courageous and necessary. And you know, in another setting, I might have done that. But the point I was trying to make was a commemorative point and a remembrance point and a healing point. And I also, I guess I erred on the side of whomever may be the relatives of the people in those photos, and that they, you know, wouldn't, Mamie Till made that decision for her own son.
Right.
So I didn't want to do that. You know, I'm fairly involved with these projects, and so I have had the experience of being with people who, as you know, one of the viewers just said, who have close relatives who were the victims of racial violence. They're the ones who should decide about what pictures are used and where. And if it were me, I would want the high school graduation photo, or I would want the, you know, joining the army or the baptism photo.
Got you. Got you. Want to say hello to Shane Bullen on the Amazon Live side. Hello to you, Shane. Mary, hello to you again. If you all have any questions on that side, feel free to put those in the comment section as well. Also, I want to address what, because Felicia, of course, had the title of the book. She said she loved the title. Talk to us about the title of the book, Memoried and Storied.
Well, that comes from a poem written by the amazing poet Elizabeth Alexander. And it actually stands at the National Monument for Peace and Justice in Montgomery. She wrote it, she was commissioned to write it for the opening of the museum. It's like, I'm not going to read the whole poem because it's long, but I do want to read the stanza that it comes from. It's called Invocation, and it opens, "The wind brings your names. We will never dissever your names, nor your shadows beneath each branch and tree." And near the end, Dr. Alexander says, "Here you will find us despite. Here you will find us, and you will not find us extinct. You will find us here, memoried and storied." You know, I told you that I took 9 names with me when I went to the museum, and 3 of them are written about and memoried and storied in my book, but the other 6 are not. They're anonymous to us, and that to me is another form of violence. Not to mention, you know, the people who commit the lynchings go unpunished, but there are records. And in Charlottesville, the DA, the local DA, has recently petitioned the state to, well, first of all, to remove the charges that were that he was falsely accused of, because he didn't commit the crime they lynched him for, as is true in almost every single case. And sometimes posthumously, these cases can be not just memoried and storied, but sometimes true justice. It's very rare, but at least the story can be told and the memory can be held.
You talked about the title. I want to ask you a question as we wrap up here. Again, thank you so much, about the subtitle, Healing Our Shared History of Racial Violence. What keeps you optimistic about the healing?
The groups I'm a part of that are multiracial, intergenerational groups of people who want to read the history and learn what happened and make it right. I'm part of a writers group. It's called Bittersweet, and it's a part of Coming to the Table, which is a peace and justice organization. Black and white writers together do genealogy to identify their ancestors and write about Black history so that we can study it together. It's American history.
Yeah.
And that keeps me very hopeful, because there's a lot of us.
Yeah, without a doubt. Felicia says, yes, I agree. We must not be silent. We must not bury the truth, no matter how hard. We must expose it and wake people up to what is in front of them. I think that is so true, and such a great conversation, such a great book, and so glad that Dawn connected us. Again, everyone, Dr. Judith Reifsteck has been our guest. Memoried and Storied is the book. You guys can see it there. Again, the subtitle is Healing Our Shared History of Racial Violence. For you guys on the Amazon Live side, you can click either here in this corner or down below to get the book for yourself. For those on the other platforms, again, the link is for Amazon to take you over there. Dr. Reifsteck, let our audience know, how can they stay connected with you?
The website's probably the best way. drjudithreifsteck.com.
All right. And we'll make sure that we link that up for you as well. Again, thank you so much again for
Great.
the time. Enjoy your time in Mississippi. And Dr. Velma says she just ordered her copy of the book. Dr. Velma, thank you for letting us know that. Hope you enjoy it. Would love for you to be able to share your thoughts as well. I'll be writing my review as well. And Dr. Reifsteck, looking forward to our next chat together.
Cyrus, thank you so much. Have a great day.
Hey, you as well. And we thank your audience for tuning in to another great segment of Cyrus Webb Presents. Until next time, I'm Cyrus Webb saying thank you so much for joining us. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.